Hello and welcome to the first Opinionated Marketers of 2024. Charles, lovely to see you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. We are going to do our annual thing of predicting the year, which is always a bit of a hostage to fortune. But here is our best guess of things that one might like to look out for in 2024.
Well, the first one is it won't be there. Not the year, but the amount of things that will not be on the shelves or wherever. So I think one of the biggest issues that will continue will be the problem with supply chains. And the implications of that, whether it happens to be into your raw materials or whether it's actual final goods. I think the continuing situations around the world will mean that we will have to get used to the fact that everything being available everywhere all the time has gone. And now we will look at the issues such as more resilience in our supply chains and therefore local sources of supply, which means you probably won't be able to get your Mange 2 365. The element that I think brings positive to that is local sourcing. We see local sourcing in many foods, but we see it also, I think, increasingly in terms of the way in which people will start to look at whether it happens to be associates, consultants, rather than farming it out to the other side of the world, and probably the increase in the use of AI and automation, which is 100% reliable in that respect. I do think the elements that we've got to get used to is this unpredictability. Someone was talking about a perma-VUCA crisis, which I thought was a terrible term, but I get the point. The element is that there is an awful lot that's going on, which is good, but it is not always predictable. It has ever been thus, but I think we now need to think about what that means for our own companies.
I mean, obviously, there's a huge environmental and upside to that, but there's also a huge element of training all of us to get used to the idea that you can't have everything 24/7, 365. So I think there's some good sides of that. There's also some downsides. There's a massive rise in people prepping as well, as more and more people are starting to realise that they can't necessarily trust central government in any country to look after their interests. So there seems to be, particularly in the Western world, quite a rise of sort of individuals looking after individuals, which I think is quite an interesting change.
I would concur. I think one of the points I made last year was that if we are going to respond successfully to the climate crisis, a lot of it is going to have to come from individuals as well as from governments. Governments are very slow to act. They're restrained by political issues. I don't necessarily see a change of government having a great deal of effect, certainly in the UK. The result of which is it's down to us as individuals and it's down to the businesses to improve their own resilience and to change their sources of supply, of power, water, etc. And to mitigate the potential impacts of climate change, whether it happens to be floods or heat waves, or indeed high winds. So yes, I think there are elements where businesses can make significant inroads into their improving their own resilience. From a marketer's perspective, I do think that, as we were talking earlier, the element of how communications are handled is going to change during, well, this year and ongoing. More and more of it becoming, I think, a mix of digital and physical. You can't rely on one anymore, if you ever could. And I think, therefore, an increasing number of people are going to events, and I think we will see a rise in that.
You mentioned politics. It is the year of elections around the world. I've forgotten the percentage of the world's population that is voting on a change of government this year, but it's huge.
It's certainly over 50%. A lot of those are in very populous countries. So the number of elections isn't that large. I mean, I think it's India, Mexico, Indonesia are the main populous countries, and then you've got America and obviously the UK. From a business perspective, looking at the potential rivals for each of the presidential roles would have an implication as to what policies might come. and what that change might be. The obvious one that everyone wants to talk about, but no one really knows the answer to, of course, is the US election. But that I think is a separate subject.
Yes, I think that's probably one for a whole another section. But I think what it is also doing, and your comment about it's not going to make a huge change, that's probably the issue. That we think it's going to be a change of government and it's all going to make things wonderful and different. And of course, on the whole, it's not very much changes at all. And I think if I have a left field concern this year, and I know this is something that's been discussed elsewhere, we do have an uprising against the haves and have-nots. It's been bubbling for a while, but is this going to be the year when people finally turn around and go, I've had enough of billionaires. Nobody needs to be a billionaire. And we don't like billionaires telling us how we're going to live our lives.
Well, it's an interesting thought. I don't necessarily see how you're going to single them out. Unless you're talking something military. I really think that, yes, there is a problem about the haves and have-nots. I don't see it necessarily coming to a head. The only way in which I could see it possibly having an effect on the political side is whether or not one election is contested strongly enough to cause a revolution. And I don't see that happening, I think even probably in America.
I think what we might find is individuals being picked off. I mean, we're watching in the UK the Michel Mone saga going on, which frankly should have happened ages ago. I mean, you know, it's inevitable. We're watching the wheels of justice possibly grind too slowly for a populace that can get fed up.
Oh, yes, I would agree with that. And I'd agree to some degree that people might take to protests, but I don't see it fundamentally changing the nature of the democratic state. The nearest we obviously got was this time last year. Was it this time? No, it wasn't. It was a few years ago now in America. But the element that caused, I think, in terms of the my God, how bad would it be? I think has caused a retrenchment of people's expectations that yes, it may grind slowly, but it needs to, at least it grinds. There would need to be, I think, in many people's minds, some sort of fundamental change to legislative processes. That's where I think the frustration comes, because you've got no one who is seemingly electable that is actually suggesting that. You've got places around the world where there are autocracies, and the only one that's being very strongly successful economically is China. So the question therefore becomes, do you wish to see your country become a Chinese-style state? We are getting onto politics here, not necessarily the future from a general perspective.
Since you raised China, there was a very interesting article in The Guardian today which was talking about the difference in the way that China views AI and uses AI compared to the way that the American corporations are pushing things like ChatGPT. And so China uses AI. They've got a massive range of influencers who are using AI. They are AI influencers. Or real influencers, but they create their own digital twin, and their digital twin keeps churning out content literally day in, day out. And I thought that was quite an interesting look at where AI is going. We haven't got onto AI. We're going to have to at some stage, because this is obviously going to be another big year of it. But I do wonder if this is the year where we actually start looking at other things that we could do with AI. There's a big court case going on at the moment with the New York Times saying that you can't, challenging the use of, that the companies can just scrape anything in order to train their AI, and saying that this is actually affecting the New York Times copyright. So we don't know when that's going to rule. Wheels of justice grind slowly, but it'd be quite interesting to see what comes out of that.
Gosh, a lot there. Right. Okay. So, yes, China tends to use nearly any new technology as a measure of social control. Control is very important to them on the basis of they need to maintain their control of power. in order to be able, as they would say, to continue to deliver the iron rice bowl. And in most instances, most Chinese people are fairly happy with that, as indeed most countries are very happy when their politicians deliver them a reasonable standard of living. And they're really not that concerned with the nature of politics until it goes wrong. So there are elements there where you could see the negative side of AI being used. There's the element of AI in the sort of trivial sense. There's two very interesting clips that you can see if you happen to have over Christmas watched Indiana Jones new film and the Mission Impossible new film, both of which have exactly the same scene of a knife fight on the top of a train. It's quite interesting, including the fact that the knife slides from one side to the other. That is produced, it would seem to me, totally by CGI and AI. The characters on there are obviously not the real characters, and it would appear, given the fact that the two are so close, that they probably aren't actually humans at all. So the question is, is it trivia? Yes. Is it entertainment? Yes. Is it going to help us do our jobs? Well, probably. One of the major professional services companies is reported now to have produced its own internal AI to reduce the time it takes their consultants to produce PowerPoint slide decks, to produce memos, to produce reports, and then they have to fact check it to make sure it hasn't hallucinated, but generally speaking, it's used to improve productivity. And so, from the trivial through to, the productivity sides, AI will have great implications. And as we've said before, just keep experimenting with it, because, it will be the dominant software from a productivity point of view. The element, I think, yes, you talk about copyright. And maybe one of the arguments here is the usual one, which is it will take a very long time for that case to come to court to be decided. And by the time anybody gets awarded any amount of money, it probably won't mean a great deal. So I don't know whether or not it's going to be significant. But you really wouldn't want to see a major advance in productivity stopped on the basis of copyright. You would think that should be settled.
It's interesting. I think that's actually, in the UK, everyone's got very excited about the Post Office Horizon scandal, which was when the Post Office, going back to the 1999, I think it originally started, where they put in a software system that checked up what the sub-postmasters were doing, accused many sub-postmasters of stealing, and refused to accept that the software was wrong. Now, this story has been around for a long time. It's suddenly come to the UK population because there was a TV show on it. But actually, I wonder if it's because of AI and we're suddenly all thinking, gosh, that could be me. Not as a sub-post officer, but as a bank account or as something that I do at work, where the AI sort of takes over and says something and it's the computer says. And everyone starts believing the computer and not me as an individual.
That, I'm afraid, I think has been around for quite a while. You are touching onto an area which I think is also one of the trends for the coming year. I was talking with a delegate yesterday that the number of companies that have now have experienced cyber attacks is getting up towards the 50% mark. And I think as that tips over, we are getting to a tipping point in the marketplace where cybersecurity becomes absolutely, well, not so much paramount, but very, very important. And I do think there's an element here where what you're saying is that security becomes very important for the individual, becomes important for the corporation, and the adjudication as to who is right and who is wrong becomes back to the political will to execute these things with the right amount of resources. And that, of course, then brings us back to politics if the criminal justice system isn't funded properly. So the whole thing, is circular. And the only way it'll all get sorted out is if there is an increase in growth and we all feel happier and everybody has more money. Um, and unfortunately, I don't see that
But
happening.
we can't spend it on anything because there's no goods.
True, true, true. But we'll find something to do with it, Kieran.
Almost certainly. So, are there any sort of other predictions that we haven't covered, Charles?
Um, there undoubtedly are. I think from the innovation perspective, it is going to be in the customer service area where the main elements of innovation will hit us next year, whether it happens to be automated in terms of purchase and delivery, or whether it happens to be in terms of customer service. I think automation is going to be a key aspect here, especially as it becomes more sophisticated. And I think that's an important aspect from the point of view of businesses to look out for. Pricing is still going to be a conundrum. How to improve your profit margins, how to mitigate that to some degree against selling more and more goods. So it may well be that we will see certain sectors have go back to an inflationary scenario. And for other organisations, the pricing side will be the other way around as they're desperate to maintain cash flow. And I think that will mean that more companies will go to the wall. I think similarly, I think education in terms of not only marketing skills, but also an understanding of how to use all that will arise and be come to the marketplace and deliver it to a willing and interested customer base, I think is important. So, there is money still available to buy those new products and services that will deliver a significant advantage, whether it's in domestic or in business. So I'm quite eagerly looking at the Consumer Electronics Show, which is starting this week in America, see what's going to come there, and also to obviously see what Apple brings forward and the other big tech companies bring forward in the next few months.
Yes, I think often we get caught up with the tech side of because Apple's bringing out some more glasses and things, aren't they? But actually, a lot of the technology changes are in things like Japan pushing ahead in care robots, and the push
Yep.
ahead for things that are going to be incredibly useful for an aging population, but perhaps don't catch the headlines as much.
Oh, yes. I think the other aspect that we ought to sort of really say is that most of the stuff that will have a major impact won't necessarily be what we would say is brand new, as in, it's announced to the world this month, and the result of which it has an impact this year. What we're going to be talking about is, as you say, care robots that have been around in Japan in niche marketplaces for almost a decade. And the result of which is that now they're starting to have significant implications because the depopulation of Japan has got to such a point that some villages are only populated by over 65s or even over 85s, and they need the services, and it's going to have to be automated. And that is not unlike situations potentially going to happen in places like Italy. And there are going to be other marketplaces around the world. The UK obviously is an example. How do we solve the social care problem in the UK if we don't either import large numbers of migrant workers or automate it? The political emphasis would undoubtedly be on automation.
Charles, lovely as ever to talk to you. I think we're both actually concerned, but also quite excited about what's coming in the next year. It's going to be another interesting ride, I suspect.
Well, as you said earlier, it's a bright sunny day here, so I'm happy.
Lovely to speak to you.